What's going on, guys? This is Mike from the songwritersplanner.com. Thank you for coming out and checking out this episode. I'm having a great time doing these podcasts. Great time getting to talk to different people, share ideas with you guys. Hopefully you guys can give me feedback on what you think of these episodes. I'd really appreciate it. As I said, I am the designer and creator of the Songwriter's Planner. It's a planner specifically designed for artists and musicians. 6 months worth of planning, scheduling, more importantly, goal tracking, hopefully allowing to be a useful tool in your toolbox for songwriting or anything that you want to accomplish with your music. So check it out, songwritersplanner.com. Much appreciated. Okay, today's episode on the podcast, I wanted to give a quick introduction. He's a friend of mine. His name is Eric Dahl from Nashville, Tennessee. And Eric is one of these guys who just does it all. It really impressed me when I got to know him. He originally contacted me with interest in the planner. He saw an ad online, and after contacting and talking with him, I learned more about what he does. And we're going to jump in this today into the podcast, but established published author, blogger for many, many publications. He does gear reviews. He has his own radio show. He is on the Nashville affiliate Fox's Rock and Review. He does interviews with local artists that come through Nashville as well as national artists. So Eric is well vested in wearing many hats, which is what I want to talk to him about today. So stick around, guys. We're going to jump into it right now, and we'll see you on the flip side of this. Peace. I have my buddy Eric on the line here. He's been gracious enough to take some time out of his busy schedule, and we're going to get into just how busy that is here in a little bit. So Eric, thank you very much for being on my podcast. I really appreciate it.
You know, it's my pleasure. I'm glad you're doing this, and I think it's so cool, that you're, inviting music people and musically oriented people on your podcast to sort of get different perspectives. I think it's a fun thing. I'm like I said, I'm glad you're doing it.
Yeah, I really appreciate those comments. I'm really going for that. To start off with, basically what I want to do is I'm going to let my listeners know. I just want to give a brief introduction of what attracted me to your presence of what you're doing there. You are a guitarist, a collector. I'm just going to go name through a few things here. You have a minor in jazz and classical guitar. You are and this is where it gets really good, is you're a published author you wrote a book about B.B. King's guitars. It's called B.B. King's Lucille and the Loves Before Her. We're going to talk about that too, which is really cool. You are a weekly TV host of a Fox affiliate called Rock and Review, where you talk to other artists, you interview other artists locally and nationally, which is amazing. And you freelance writer, author, blogger, many, many articles. You write for Maverick Country magazine out of the UK. And you also have a radio show. It's called Acme Radio Gear Gab. So that is, we're going to start off with that.
Yeah, it sounds much more impressive when you put it that way.
Man,
like when I do it on a weekly basis, it doesn't seem that bad.
Yeah, well, and I have an affinity for folks like yourself that just decide to wear many hats. And I think that's what drew me to what you're doing is like you just do all these different things in not only those things but in the city of Nashville. And as all you podcast listeners and viewers out there know, we're talking Music City here. So,
it's funny because it kind of, the things just kind of happen at a point, and just like you with development of your book and everything. Mm-hmm. To me, things kind of just evolved. I started playing guitar very young because my father was a bass player, and so I started guitar at 5, and so I've always, been around music and musicians and all that good stuff. And then, it's kind of wild, from playing in bands over the years and all this good stuff, how things have sort of evolved, Mike. And so, the whole, TV deal, that really got started with doing the Rock and Review here in Nashville after I moved here. Mm-hmm. And I'd pitched the idea to news, and they really didn't understand what I was wanting them to do, because I'm an idea guy, I'm a creative. So my real day job during the day is is promotion and programming
Mm-hmm.
for 3 TV stations here in Nashville with, Fox 17, CW 58, and my TV 30. So that's actually my real job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was throwing it to news going, hey, why don't you guys do this? We're in Music City. Nobody's really doing anything on music gear.
Right.
And I've always, just like yourself, I've got a passion for new music gear and things that, we can make music with and make it easier, that make the whole process better.
Mm-hmm.
And news just really didn't understand what I was talking about. So I kept bugging them, of course. And eventually, the news director was like, well, why don't you do it? And it's like, well, I never really thought of that.
Yeah.
And I hadn't been on air on television since back like 99 to 2001, back in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. My GM had made me be the on-air host until I could afford one.
Right.
And he said, if you do it for 3 to 6 months, I'll let you hire one. And I did it for 3 years. So I never got to hire one. It was pretty tricky, but I had fun.
Yeah.
But, with the whole, rock and review thing, it really started off as just covering music gear. If you look at the early ones,
Mm-hmm.
it was basically just me coming in with new music gear. I was being sent and found, and reviewing it and sort of saying, okay, here's what it does. And then one of my directors just suggested, he said, hey, man, why don't you start bringing in guests? And then you can have other people talking with how they use the music gear.
Uh-huh. What a great idea.
At first, it was a great idea, but at first, you're kind of insulted. You're like going, am I that bad on air? But then you start thinking about it going, actually, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
And so I started reaching out. And the funny thing of it was, Mike, was that I was reaching out to side people, so people that played with and for these big stars like Big and Rich and Reba and all these different musicians, Tim McGraw, and because they never get noticed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they should be noticed, and get some time in the spotlight. So I would bring them in to talk about their music gear. And then as we went through the years, when we started doing this show back in 2012, it just kind of evolved to where, then the big stars wanted to come on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of been the evolution of the show. And I mean, we're at like almost 350 episodes now.
Wow, that's amazing. That is awesome.
It's kind of wacky. It's so funny because, and I really, it's so interesting. The way I approach it is that I, being a musician, come at it from kind of a different angle.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to do an interview with anybody, with an artist, with with a builder like Ned Steinberger or anybody. I don't want to do an interview that is just like surface. I don't want it to be the same interview that everybody else is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of drill down pretty deep, and I think that's where the gold is. That's where the nuggets of information are.
Yeah.
To where you can talk to them about more than just the new album, the new book, the charity, the tour, or whatever. It's like, well, what about your hobbies?
Yeah.
What do you do when you're not, playing to, 20,000 people in an arena? What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's where the interesting tidbits really come out.
See, I think that's what's really cool. And you mentioned earlier, and I want to reiterate that is, you are a musician.
Right.
You have roots in being a musician as well. So you're not just some guy who is a TV show host, and that's your job. You are actually a rooted musician. And I think that's what makes it so cool is that you can relate to a lot of the guests you have on from a musician standpoint. And I don't know, if you're like me, you probably are. I love hanging with musicians. I mean, it's just my favorite people,
me too. It's like, I've been around, musicians all my life, just like, my mom was an art teacher, and so I've been around artists and musicians all my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really the people that I'm most comfortable with.
Yeah.
And so my joke, when I, a lot of times I'll have the artist come into the TV studio before we go down to the in my office before we go to the studio to record the interview. And it's like, if we weren't doing this in front of TV cameras, we'd still be doing the same thing over lunch or coffee or beers.
Exactly. Yes.
And talking music gear and talking about your album. And I think, so many of them, it's been so funny on it, Mike, because like when Johnny Lang, did an interview with me a few months ago, and like Guthrie Trapp and some of these other people, we get done and they're like going, I can't believe I just did a TV interview where we got to talk about my guitar. And so these people, these guys and gals have been doing interviews for decades,
Yeah.
but they've never gotten to do a television interview,
Mm-hmm.
to where they actually get to dig down. It's like with talking with Tommy Emmanuel about his guitars.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, if you and I were sitting around, that's what we go, hey, what amplifier pedal did you pick up lately?
Yeah.
Well, here's what I've been,
Yeah. And I'm sure that they really appreciate that, you digging in with them, because they probably get the same questions asked over and over, like you were saying. What's the latest album? When are you touring? Which is really, flattering if you're a musician, obviously, if you're getting that kind of press and everything. But it really makes a difference when you connect with someone who's like, hey, man, like, where'd you get the guitar from?
Right.
What amp are you using? And just really dig in with these guys. So that's a cool perspective, man. I really appreciate
and
that
I think
one.
it takes it for the artist and for hopefully the viewer to a different level, because there is that connection. I mean, like, last time before I had Keifer Sutherland on, and he's got new singles and a new album coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're talking because I had interviewed him for Collectible Guitar for a cover magazine thing a few years back.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about guitars, and he was asking me, he's like, well, what are you hunting for right now? And I told him the latest guitar that I'm in search of. He said, oh man, let me show you the picture of the one I just picked up. And so so he pops up on his iPhone and he's scanning through, dude, check this out. And so we're like comparing guitars.
Oh man, that's awesome. That's
before
awesome.
you sit down and do the interview. And so that's, that to me, that's the fun of it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, all of us musicians, guys and gals, we're all the same. We all just want to, we don't want the same old questions. And if you hit us with something that we love and are passionate about, heck, we'll talk all day.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I agree. And I think that's what's beneficial about having musicians interview other musicians, is that you just connect on a level where you can understand each other and get and geek out and talk about cool things that we all enjoy as players, So
well, and that's the thing, we do, like a shorter interview that falls into the newscast, because it airs usually Wednesday mornings on Fox 17, and then it airs Thursday night up in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. But then the extended interview, as you know, goes to fox17.com and to our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And that's the one that kind of goes in depth. I've got an interview coming up this next week that we shot with Joe Bonamassa.
Oh, love him.
And it was just a lot of fun, and I've been trying to get Joe on the show for a while.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, the guy's always touring. He's got 2 side bands.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just, I learned a lot about his philosophies and everything else in that time. But, I build out the folder, and then I do all my homework, and then there's no teleprompter.
Right.
So it comes down to having key things you want to talk about, which I always forget some of the key things, because then I'm listening to the artist I'm interviewing, and I'm kind of bouncing off the things that they say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where it gets really interesting, to where it kind of leads you in other directions that you hadn't even thought of.
Yeah. Like you have a list of questions that you're ready to go, and then you just end up ignoring all of it.
Yeah, it really is. Because, we get done and we're driving back, in the van with all the camera gear. I'm like going, oh, I forgot to ask about his foundation. I forgot to ask about this. But you know how it is, man, when you're in the moment,
yeah,
and you're trying to keep everything going with the questions and be engaging and learn things.
Mm-hmm.
And also eventually, you got to wrap this thing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything has time limitations, but yeah, the Rock and Review thing, there's some other TV markets looking at it and, looking at airing it in their newscast. And it's really one of those passion projects. I mean, it made me feel good. A few weeks ago, I was in Las Vegas for meetings, and the head of news for our company, Scott Livingston, I went up to him to talk to him about something else, and he stops me and goes, man, I'm really enjoying your segments. I'm like going, what? Because it could just kind of, it was not what I expected.
Yeah.
Because, they're not really newsy. They're entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
and I find them interesting, and they feed my heart and soul. But it was nice to hear that from corporate management.
Mm-hmm. And obviously people are connecting with what you're doing because, well, you're still on, It's like,
right. Always a good sign.
Yeah. And people are obviously getting a lot of value out of it. I mean, you're interviewing a lot of people who, not just national people, but you also do a lot of local. Is that right?
You're right. You're precisely right. You know what I try and do, and it's, I think from my early beginnings, even in television and media, I've always been a fan of the underdogs,
Mm.
and it's always appealed to me. So I try and get a certain amount of up and comers, maybe people with like debut albums and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I try, you got to get a certain amount of the big names because then news stays happy with you and lets your show stay on.
Yep.
And then another level that I always try and get on that I'm really passionate about, a lot of people, and sometimes radio, unfortunately, forget about the legends and the icons.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try and get those people on, like a Charlie Pride and Kenny Rogers and people like that you don't hear on daily radio anymore. But I mean, these are legends and icons.
Mm-hmm. Those yeah. Go ahead.
And I was just going to say that's kind of like my three buckets. You know what I mean? It's like, I try and get, my heart is definitely with the up and comers and with the legends. But then also it doesn't hurt if you have Dolly or Garth on air and people go, it's like the Winter NAMM show, Mike, this last year. And so walking around with my brother-in-law, we're hitting all the booths because I'm always looking for new gear to cover.
Mm-hmm.
And people are like, hey, you've got a TV show. And it's like going, yeah. And it's like suddenly after 6 years, it's an instant success because you have Dolly on.
Yeah.
It's like going, yeah, it's been on since 2012.
Yeah.
Oh, I just knew about it a month ago.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, at least you know now.
It's funny how that works. I mean, it takes time. Obviously, building something takes time, but I love the fact that you include those three categories of artists. With especially the artists who influenced the well-known artists.
Right.
The ones who probably wouldn't be around if it wasn't for these people.
And there's so many of those. That's like I think a week or so ago, I had John Scott Sherrill on, and a lot of people, I met him at a songwriter thing that some buddies were putting on, and looking at him, you wouldn't, you would think he was like, a brother of Leon Russell or something,
Mm-hmm.
but he wrote 11 number one hits. So, the guy wrote songs for, George Strait and Johnny Lee and Mick Jagger and all this stuff. But, this is his first solo album in his advanced years. And so it's sort of fun. He was tickled to come on TV and get a chance, to talk about this and to talk about his Martin guitar.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So it's a lot of fun doing stuff like that.
Yeah, that is awesome. Let me hit you up about talking about the city of Nashville that you live in.
Yeah.
So when did you move there, and what have you found to be the, for someone who doesn't live in Nashville, or for musicians out there who have always been curious about the city, what do you consider like the pros and the cons of living in such a historic city like that?
It's so interesting you bring that up because, being raised in Southeast Missouri, and then TV sent me to Vegas for 10 years, and then TV ended up moving me here. And I'd been here in 82 when I got out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
I came to Belmont to become a rock star.
Ah.
And that's where I really studied a lot of guitar. And I also realized there were a lot of hungry rock stars here.
Yeah.
And that maybe I should reconsider my vocation.
Well, we have the same dream. We had the same dream after high school. Wow.
Yeah. So I'm like going, well, it's one of those things because, in a little town like I was raised, it's like, well, I was very well known for being a guitar player and, and all this kind of stuff. And you go to Nashville and it's like, yeah, nobody knows me here.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people, that are just insanely incredible musicians trying to make it. So, for me, my first trip here was in 82, and then I went back to Missouri and got a degree in mass communications, which was probably wiser. But the second time in Nashville, my family and I moved here in 2011 for TV work again, and everybody in Vegas when we moved here was like, hey man, I'm sure you're going to be playing a lot of great gigs and down on Broadway and all this kind of stuff, because I was playing casinos all the time in Las Vegas. Like 3 or 4 times a week, and plus I'd play church and the praise team on Sunday. And you move to Nashville, and the musicians here are actually trying to make it. They and that was the difference is, with me, it's a paid hobby to support my gear addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I was playing gigs in Las Vegas and everywhere. I played gigs all over my life. After having that humbling reality check to where, okay, instead I'm always going to play guitar and music, but I want to support my addiction. So if I want to buy a new Martin Merle Travis guitar or amplifier pedal, whatever, I can go do it. And you come to Nashville, and it's harder to find places to play here because people are playing Broadway to try and be discovered. So, because, Keith Urban or Tim McGraw may walk in and go, Mike, you're the guy.
Yeah.
I'm taking you on tour.
I mean, the level of go-getism, I guess, I don't know, that's a new word now. Just the level of, hustle out there has got to be next level, I mean,
it really is. I think it can be, as it was for me, it can be intimidating, and there's not as many places to really play cover music like I have done, forever since I was a teenager. So here, when you come into Nashville, you kind of got to readjust your whole way of thinking, and it's all about networking and meeting the right people and being a good hang and being humble. And so something I forced myself to do, and it's like, man, it's those things that you make yourself do that challenge you, but I think they make me better, I hope. But I usually play a songwriter round at least once or twice a month. And so my joke on that is that I torture tourists with my original songs after I've tortured myself to write them. And so, because I mean, it's not my macaroni and cheese, man. It's not my comfort food,
right,
to do it. But you know what? I love playing guitar. It's just, it's harder for me. I'm never satisfied with my originals, and so, it's harder for me to go up there and do it. But I always meet interesting people, and bless her heart, Debbie Champion that runs the songwriter thing I always play at the Commodore.
Yeah.
She always books me back. And I don't know if it's out of pity or humor or what, but she just always has me back. And I love it. But I always meet interesting people. And sometimes I've even met people that I end up interviewing, either through the TV or radio show. So, musically here, I think Nashville is one of those towns to where it's so fertile creatively. And if you meet the right people, I can tell you, Mike, that I have gotten better as a musician just from living here in Nashville, because you rub shoulders and you're hanging out with Tom Bresh, Johnny Hyland, Tommy Emmanuel, Brent Mason. I mean, you're rubbing shoulders with these people, and you can't help but get better because you're watching them and stealing licks.
Yeah, I imagine that would kind of just up your game for anybody. Naturally, you just start upping things,
It really, there's no question. It ups your musical talent. But the thing is, though, these are the people that are actually making a living at it.
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of, everybody still asks me, it's like, well, are you gigging all the time? It's like, if I go back to Missouri, I gig. If I go back to Vegas, I can gig. But here in Nashville, I'll sit in with people. But I mean, I'm not going to kid myself. I mean, I've known Eric for a long time, and I'm not to that level. I can sit in and have some fun. And like I said, I do make myself do, go out and do the rounds, do a songwriter round at least once or twice a month to get out and play and keep up my chops. But you have to be realistic when you come to Nashville. I think the unfortunate thing, sometimes when you meet these people, it's like, well, I'm from this little town in Iowa, and I've won these awards and I'm the top musician. It's like going, come on down, go to Robert's Western World and see what you think.
Yeah.
I mean, and not that everybody is an A-list player that you see and hear down on Broadway, but I mean, there are some pretty amazing ones, Mike.
Yeah.
And if you go see the Time Jumpers, and you've got, Vince Gill or Webb Wilder and all these different people playing with the Time Jumpers, it's like going, okay, that's pretty impressive.
It's kind of like, based out of Phoenix, LA is kind of that city that West Coast people migrate to. And it's the same thing, everybody comes out there, they've got their guitar, they've got their instruments, and they're ready to just tear it up. And you get there and you're like, whoa, I'm either going to have to step it up or I'm going to have to quit. One of the two.
Well, and I think that's what, I think the people that survive, that come back, that are actually trying to do music, number one, kind of like we were joking about the TV show, taking 6 years for people to actually know it's on air.
Yeah.
It's the same thing to where a lot of musicians call Nashville a 10-year town, because you have to have so many thousand hours under your belt of playing, just like a J.D. Simo or Brent Mason and Daniel Donato, before you are that good, and then people notice you, before you musically stand above other people. and you just can't hop in here and go, yeah, I'm gonna find, somebody's gonna, hear my song and pick it up. Well, your odds aren't really good.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no getting around that. There's no getting around putting in the work and the networking and the hanging. And there's just, I think a lot of maybe the younger generation, it's all about patience, right? Patience and hard work.
Right.
It always comes back to patience and hard work.
Well, and I think a lot of it too, just like when you start anything, just like you and I have both done, to where you got to kind of have a plan and a strategy. And maybe that is, playing the songwriter rounds around Nashville, getting to know people, honing your songwriting craft, doing a YouTube channel, doing things like that, to where you're growing and expanding, because, it's a much bigger pond. Like I said, even when I go back, to Missouri, where I was raised, or Las Vegas, I'm known in those areas. But, in Nashville, you got to make a bigger splash to be known. Now, granted, I'm known now with, the show and with my kind of music niche stuff, but it's a big pond here, man.
Yeah. Yeah. You brought up a good point there I want to expand on. What do you think is, the new way of writing and creating music, but also doing things like creating content with YouTube and Instagram and even authoring and blogging? Do you think that artists coming up today should invest time in doing those things to help give them, heighten their awareness or heighten their profile in addition to playing music?
That's a brilliant question. I'll tell you one, and I'm asked this a lot of times by up and coming artists and friends of mine, that are in the music biz. And it's funny because, 6 years ago, when we started doing stuff, 6 or 7 years now. So, basically, when they wanted to get somebody on your show or an artist or whatever, it's like, they've sold this many million albums and this many million singles.
Yeah.
You know what they do now, Mike, is they'll send me an email breakout with a press release going, he or she has this many Twitter followers, this many Instagram. Here's how many views on YouTube. So now the whole currency and the analytics have changed to where it's more about your digital footprint than the albums, because the music industry as a whole is so, it's so hard for somebody to make a living at. I mean, so many songwriters, even hit songwriters, they may work another job during the day. And then, the big thing here in Nashville, and once again, that people need to think about, co-writing. More people co-write here by far than just, sitting down and writing a song by yourself.
And there's money, there's good money in that.
Right. And there's all sorts of different, there's analytics to that, to where if you come up with the hook, here's how much you get and all that kind of good stuff. But I mean, it's just so funny. I've met a lot of people that have had hit songs here, but one hit song is not going to feed you. You're going to get that much money, and you're going to get that much, if it's a number one, you'll get what they call the mailbox money. And then at a point, as the song gets older and until somebody re-records it or something else, unless you're Bill Anderson, having hits every decade, then the mailbox money kind of stops. And you can't live off of Pandora and Spotify money. Although, once again, Mike, you got to have listeners on those formats as well for people to find you. So, and like you brought up too, like with the blog, it's like I broke down this year. It's like I've been fighting this, man. But like with the things that I'm doing on for my outside stuff with the TV, the radio, magazine, book, and torturing tourists with originals. Then the blog thing, I decided, well, you know what, I really need an outlet to where I can just write short things, from my life experience in a blog, and just kind of share those with people. And maybe they help them, and if nobody likes it, at least it's cathartic for me. And so I started doing it last week, I guess a week or two ago, and released my second one today. And I think people are receiving them well, because I think that we all share sort of common things in life. And the first one was about all my failures. And so essentially how all of the things I failed at led me down other paths that were actually better for me. And so, failing is not bad, as long as you, find another path and go, okay, well, I learned from that failure. Just like, on the B.B. King book, when I'd finished writing that, and I'm like going, you know, it's just like the people that come to Nashville and think, I'm going to be a hit songwriter. They're going to be throwing money at me and giving me guitars. And so with the B.B. King book, I idolized B.B. King so much and just, and I've known him since I was a little kid, from the music and everything. And I go to two publishers and they shoot me down because they go, yeah, he's not a big enough name.
Yeah.
And then it's like going, and it humbles you. And you have to sort of regroup and go, okay, well, I need to rethink this,
Right.
And then I ended up getting it published, fortunately. But then I've heard horror stories from other people that got like 100 rejections on a book until they got it published. So that I only got 2. I'm pretty fortunate.
Yeah. Being that you have written a book, which is amazing. I mean, that's a lot of work. You're an active writer for articles, and now you're doing a blog. Do you think that authoring and writing and blogging is something that musicians should seriously consider, to help build their presence? Obviously you're not writing music, but you have it's like another outlet, that creative outlet that you have.
Right. And I think the answer is definitely yes. A lot of people that I admire and I'm friends with here, even like John Bollinger from Premier Guitar, and Ted Drozdowski from Premier, and a lot of people that I am friends with here in Nashville, and have read their articles for years. They, even though they perform or tour with, Lee Brice or whomever, they also write articles. And so, I think it's part of the creative process, with the writing. That's, once again, with the book, the reason I decided to do the book was after, returning, BB's stolen Lucille when I lived in Vegas. Was, I'd researched that guitar for 2.5 months, and I really learned a lot. I bought books. I mean, I just immersed myself in it, Mike. And so when I got done, I went back home to visit family over that Christmas, and I realized nobody had written a book covering his guitars. So there was a lot of information out there that was just, it wasn't there. And so that's when I reached out to BB and his management, everybody, and said, hey, would you allow me to write a book about all of your Lucille's? And he was like, yeah, nobody knows more about Lucille now than you. And I'm like,
I just want to reiterate to folks who may be listening to this that we're talking about the event that occurred 2009, I believe it was, right, where you actually found BB King's one of his guitars, Lucille, in a pawn shop. You were contacted because you do work with pawn shops, is that right?
And music stores. And I work with the Guitar Blue Books on instrument values and all that good stuff.
Okay, and basically what happened is you came across this guitar, which ended up being BB King's Lucille, which was stolen earlier that year, and you found out about it. I mean, you recognized it and you did the research on it, and you ended up returning it to him, which is crazy. That's amazing.
It's one of those funny stories to where if I didn't have pictures, I really wouldn't believe it myself. And and if you look at one of Mr. King's older albums, there's a picture of him as a little boy in the front. I can't remember the name of the album now, Mike, but a picture of him in front of this window of a pawn shop, and his Lucille is in the front window.
Oh my God!
And it was almost like prophesized. And that it ended up falling into my hands. And I obviously, when I bought it, I had no idea that it had been stolen from him. I just thought that he had given it to some musician, and the musician got down and out and hocked it. And so I was, when I was researching it, I was just trying to find out if BB even played it for 5 minutes and then gave it away, because it was one of those things to where when the pawn shop called me, and I'd bought another Lucille from them a few years before, and I was always in there every week and doing values for them and everything for fun. And they said, hey, call up. We got another Lucille coming out. Do you want to see it before it hits the floor? And I'm like, well, kind of broke right now, but it's like, oh, come on, take a look. And so I drove up to the pawn shop, and they pull out the case, and and the case is kind of beat up, and then the guitar is just covered in sweat, and it's just all funky. And I'm like I'm thinking to myself, Mike, it's like, man, whoever had this really must have left town quick, because they did not, who wouldn't wipe down a nice guitar? You know what I mean? And so then I flip it over, and on the back of the headstock, it says Prototype 1. And I think probably then Chaz, who was one of my buddies at the pawn shop then, he probably saw my eyes light up.
Yeah, because you don't see
And so,
that. You never see that on a guitar,
no,
a
not in
prototype.
public, because usually, either the artist own them or the guitar companies keep them.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, I said to him, I said, what kind of deal could you cut me on this? He's like going, yeah, we can't cut you a deal on this one. Sorry, man. It's like, you're getting first shot at it.
Yeah.
And so I had to go outside the store and call my wife.
Take a second mortgage out on the house.
Yeah, because I told her, I said, hey, if I buy this guitar, can I still come home? And she's like, yeah, you know what you're doing. Go ahead. And so, I bought it, and then I researched it for 2.5 months until finally Pat Foley, who was working for Gibson at the time, calls me up at the TV station, goes, yeah, he said, Colin, you have a B.B. King Lucille. I said, yes. I said, you're not helping me. I've got 6 other B.B. King Lucilles. I said, I'm really trying to find some information on this thing. He goes, well, Mr. Dahl, you have B.B. King's 80th birthday present. He'd really like to get it back.
Oh my
and
God.
I'm like, and it's one of those things to where it's like, I was just dumbfounded. It was just almost, I had to stand up while I was talking to him at that point. And so the funny thing was, though, how it all went down was then Gibson said, well, how much is it going to cost to get the guitar back to B.B. King? Because I take a very naive, Midwest guy. I wasn't thinking that way at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, they were like, well, how much money is it going to take? It's like, well, it's not going to take any money. I'm going to give back Mr. King's guitar.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, well, we'll call you back. Well, then B.B. King's management calls me. Tina France, I think it was, and it called me up and said, and everybody's got the checkbook open. They're like, well, we understand you might have Mr. King's 80th birthday guitar, and we'd like to know how much you need to return this. I said, I need nothing to return this. I want no money. And they're like, I don't think we're exactly understanding you, Mr. Dahl. Because obviously, he'd had a number of them stolen over the years, including the first one that he had retrieved, out of the house fire in Twist, Arkansas. Ugh. So they were all kind of blown away, and so finally she was just kind of frustrated with me, and she's like, well, what do you want? I said, well, I paid so much money, it'd be nice to have a Lucille back if I could, but that, I don't want any money or anything. Mm-hmm. They're like, okay, well, we've got to talk to BB. And so, and then after BB found out about all of it, he wouldn't accept back the guitar until he had one for me.
Wow.
And so once he was able to get one in from Gibson, I met him at his office there in Las Vegas, and he comes in, shakes my hand, just huge hands. And, it's like, this is one of those times I was really starstruck. Usually I'm not starstruck. Mm-hmm. And he goes, hi, I'm BB. And I'm like, going, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
And I figured that. That's why there's pictures of you with the Pope and Stevie Ray Vaughan and every president here in your front lobby. But, I'm like going, yeah, I'm Eric. He's like, you want a Diet Coke? I'm like, no, I think I'm good.
Yeah.
And so, but we go back into his office, and, I give him back his Lucille, and I had all the parts for it and everything still in the middle control panel. And then he gives me a brand new one and signs it for me. And signs my book and just keeps thanking me.
That's amazing.
Because he never thought that they would see it again.
Yeah.
And he had never had one of the stolen ones returned. Mm-hmm. So after that was the only Lucille he played from 2009 until he stopped touring in 2014.
Wow.
And he had his personal assistant, Myron, carry the guitar off and on stage after that.
Yeah. That's such an amazing story. And
it was, it was one of those good feel-good stories. It's funny though here in Nashville, because I'm in Gibson country, and it's kind of like myth. Everybody knows the story here, but they don't know it's me.
Right.
They don't connect the dots that that I would, because if you pull it up online, it's like Las Vegas guitar collector Eric Dahl.
Yeah.
It's like going, yeah, that guy lives in Nashville now.
Kudos to you for just being straight up upstanding guy and just saying, I don't want anything, you don't have to pay me. I'm not holding it for ransom. This is BB.
It felt right.
His guitar. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, we as musicians, once again, just like talking on interviewing musicians, it's just the right thing to do. No matter whose instrument it was, I would return it.
Right.
And I think most musicians would, because we've all had things stolen over the years, and they don't usually get returned. And to be able to do that for one of your idols, and make him, I'm not kidding, the expression on his face was like I'd given him $1 million. because he never thought he would see that. And that was his favorite Lucille.
Mm-hmm.
You
Wow.
know, of all the Lucille's he had and the many guitars that he owned, which I was told there were like 300 instruments that he had in his vault,
Mm-hmm.
this was his favorite.
Wow.
And so to be able to give that back to him and allow, you know, so he could play it and enjoy it more.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those kind of amazing moments. Like I said, you know, it's so funny because some of my guys at work were like going, "Hey, now you got to find Eric Clapton's stolen Strat." And I always joke, I'm like, you know, I think lightning only strikes like one time like this, you know.
Oh man, you could become a private investigator for missing instruments of, you know, musicians. That's
Well,
hilarious.
you know what's so funny now is that, you know, after that all went down and the book came out and all that, is I've kind of become like the Lucille whisperer. So
Yeah.
when anybody has any questions about Lucille, even the Gibson Custom Shop, they'll call me up. And so it's just kind of funny when you have to go, well, if you'll refer to page 25 of my book on Lucille, and you'll see the picture of this instrument. And it's like going, this is so odd. It's just kind of surreal,
Yeah.
you
I'm
know, but
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I'm definitely going to include a link on this podcast for you guys listening out there and watching. There's going to be a link on the blog here to Eric's book to check it out. It's on Amazon. I know it's on out there, so I'll get a link to that. And it's just an amazing story that you have here, man.
well, it's
Um,
just so funny that a lot of, you know, even, gosh, I guess Charlie didn't, last time I interviewed Charlie was years or so ago. And of course, Charlie and I are talking guitars. He's got like an obscene Les Paul collection.
mhm.
And he did not know that I was the Lucille guy. And once he realized it, he's like, Eric, I gotta have a copy of your book. And so I had to go buy a copy of my own book and send it over to Charlie, you know, because he wanted it for his collection, you
Yeah,
know. And it's
yeah,
like going, okay, once again, that's kind of surreal.
yeah, yeah. I would buy my own book and send it off.
Yeah, but
That's
you know,
cool.
but I'll tell you what. Once again, stepping outside of our comfort zone, I never dreamed of writing a book. You know, I'd always wanted to write articles for guitar magazines. You know, for most of my life, I wanted to because I always read those magazines all the time.
Hmm.
But I never dreamed of doing a book. And so I didn't realize, you know, because I wrote part of it in Las Vegas and I finished it here in Nashville. And it really opened up a lot of doors for me
Mm,
because suddenly being a published author, you're more credible
yeah. It's no joke.
because
It's no joke for
because
sure.
it's not easy to get, you know, a publisher to publish your book. I mean,
Hmm.
you can self-publish and do things like that, which is not cheap, but I
Hmm.
mean, at least it gets it out.
Hmm.
But to actually have a publisher jump in and put out your book, you know, it really opened a lot of doors for me. I think it gave me more credibility with the Rock and Review, and truthfully, Mike, that's how I ended up getting the radio show. Was that a buddy of mine, Tim Hibbs, who works for Acme Radio Live, also remembered me from the Country Music Hall of Fame when I did a book signing there because
Hmm.
I booked my own book signings. You know, it's once again, it's like the guy with the cymbals between his legs. I'm doing it all. And so you know, I got one at the Country Music Hall of Fame, and Tim remembered me and invited me on his vinyl lunch. And so a lot of the show, we were talking about the book and talking about BB
Yeah.
and the whole pawn shop thing we were talking about. Well, then his boss that owns the place, Tom Morales, heard the radio show and said, "Hey, I want to have lunch with you." It's like, okay. And I just thought, you know, free lunch. I'll go have free lunch.
Yeah.
And it ends up that Tom wanted me, you know, and it was like, this has been 2 years ago, this September. Tom wanted me to do my own radio show. And he wanted me to do it kind of like the Rock and Review, but do it for a full hour and do whatever I wanted. He
Mm,
said, you got a full hour, do whatever you want.
yeah.
And so with the Acme Radio Gear Gab, it's kind of the same thing. The artist gets to play 3 songs and we get to talk. We really get to go pretty far down the rabbit hole on talking music gear.
Hmm.
And I've had, Tommy Emmanuel on that and Rory Block and just a lot of fun musicians. You know, Mark Huff was on this last week. I got Corey Congilio coming up.
Wow, that's awesome.
And it's just a lot of fun because I get to really dig into the music gear and talk about, you know, what they started playing, you know, and you got a full hour to do it in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the artists, it's funny, you know, a lot of artists that have done like the TV and the radio that like, yeah, I really like the radio show because there's more time
Hmm.
and we get to play 3 songs.
Hmm.
So, and then also for the NAMM shows, like when I go to Winter NAMM, I take a digital recorder with me and I record interviews there. And then I bring them back here to Nashville and we do a show with a lot of the, you know, new gear people I've talked with about their merchandise, sort of as a recap to Winter NAMM.
That's a great idea. To do that, going to NAMM and actually you're in the field, right? In the field out there.
Yeah, because I'm in the
folks.
field and I've got like my little digital recorder and my lavalier microphones. And so, I sit down with people and I'll do, like a 3 to possibly 7 minute interview.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll bring them back and put them all together in an hour-long show, because the NAMM show has been very good to me over the years in working with me on, with the TV, with the radio, with the magazines. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's just an incredible candy store for all of us, for music dealers and for music merchants. And once again, man, I like the new little companies that are struggling, that have a new product,
mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, tell me what this does.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you develop this?
Yeah.
How is this going to make, music better? What does it do?
Yeah. And I appreciate that, because that's kind of how you reached out to me. And I think that we
exactly.
we both have the same mentality, that we always root for the underdogs, and I really am fascinated by that concept of kind of, I like rooting in the trenches, with everybody else, because I think that's where the most innovation and the most work needs to be done. And like these people like myself and a lot of musicians I know, I just embrace that concept of the underdog, work.
But
hard,
also, I think that's where some of the greatest things come about,
mm-hmm.
and what's fun for me is talking with, inventors and developers and stuff. They're so passionate about it, man.
Mm-hmm.
A big company rolls out something that's like, dun, da, 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 here's our big line of guitars, all stuff. I'm sure there's a builder, in the back room that's very excited about all this stuff. But when you go down to Hall E at the Winter NAMM show, man, it's like these people are so thrilled that you're stopping and talking to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're going, hey, I'm interested. I might be able to cover you, in Maverick Country magazine
mm-hmm.
or magazine about your product.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, how much is it going to cost? It's like, it's free.
Imagine that.
It's like, I can afford that because I had to mortgage my home to get the booth here. And I mean, my buddy Vinny from VPix, the first time I met his wife was at a Winter NAMM show years ago, and he lives here in Nashville now, not far from me.
Mm-hmm.
And they had mortgaged their home to have a booth at NAMM, and they had one pick design at the time.
Oh.
And I still have that one pick that she gave me, and I'll never forget, when I met her, and she's like, would you like to try out our pick? I'm like going, yeah, what styles do you have? She's like, this is it.
I have nothing but love and admiration for people like that, who just go all in and are just passionate about what they're doing. They have the world stacked against them. They don't have the biggest budgets, but they're just like, I'm doing this. I have to do this.
But I think a lot of the coolest products though it's not something new. I mean, it's not something, it's like, oh my gosh, I've invented the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something, like a holder for a phone. Like when Kaiser came out with the capo that will also hold your cell phone. So that you can watch the tutorials and move the capo. It's like, okay, well, that's pretty brilliant.
Yeah, that is.
So sometimes to me, it's the little things that help us that are convenient,
mm-hmm.
and those are fun. Just something different that's going. Yeah, I would. They sent me a thing. I guess a month ago. Peak music stands, and I can't remember. I found them about like how I found you,
mm-hmm.
and so I reached out to them, and they're always like, "Who is this odd guy that writes for the magazine?" And I said, hey, I'm interested in covering your new products. And they were like, well, we have a new, music stand that folds down into a square and you could throw into a bag. And I'm like going, that sounds pretty darn handy to me.
Yeah.
And so I played in the pit for a play that my wife and daughter were in a week or so ago. And I had to use the stand because I had like 4 or 5 sheets of music up at once.
Oh.
And so I sent them pictures of it and I posted it on my Instagram. They're like going, oh my gosh, were you using this in the field? I'm like, yeah, I was playing 3 shows at a play and I was switching between mando guitar, banjo-guitar, and guitar, and I had to have all my music up and I used your stand.
Nice.
But that's the fun. You get to try it in the field,
Yeah, and they value that feedback, I'm sure, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Well, oh man, I just cannot believe how fast this time rolls by, man. I want to ask you one more question.
Please.
Before we sign off, and I really am going to beg you to get back on here again with me sometime. But
I'm honored. This is a lot of fun. It's great talking with you. I'm glad we found each other, and
I know.
got to find your cool songbook deal too. Because once again, tools for songwriters. It's funny when I write a lot of the stuff for Maverick Country, I gear it towards songwriters because I bump into so many of them here because the person that is giving you your chalupa at Taco Bell probably also has an album.
Oh, that's such a great way to put it.
And they can probably outplay you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That is such a great way to put that because you're completely right. One thing I just wanted to touch on real quick before we unfortunately have to tie down was you wear so many hats, Eric, and and it may not seem like it to you, but what's your secret, I should say, or what credo do you follow to get all these things done? Because you are all walk and no talk. So, like, it's like you actually do these things. So what keeps you going? What makes you do all of these things? The writing, the radio,
you're going to laugh about this, but once again, wacky stuff that happens in Vegas. I was at the opening of a restaurant and I met Harpo the Clown. I don't know if you ever heard of Harpo, but he was like the clown to like President Ford and all these different presidents and world-renowned clown. And so I'm talking with Harpo. And I'm talking, saying, hey man, I'm gonna, I think I'm gonna start working on this, book and and he's working on his book.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, how do you do it? How do you make headway? I said, I treat it like a giant Whopper. I said, I try to take one bite out of it a day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like with all my projects with with the TV interviews, with the radio, with the magazine, with the blog, with, my horrible songwriting. I try and a bite a day, man, because if you look at the whole burger, if you look at the whole picture, just like with the stuff you do, it's too overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people get stifled because they're going, that's a giant mountain. I can never, go up that big mountain.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? If you take so many steps a day, suddenly you're up the mountain, and so that's kind of how I try and achieve each of them, because if I look at the whole picture, I would be so overwhelmed I would accomplish nothing.
Yeah, I completely can relate to that feeling. And the way you're describing it is the best way to approach things. It's like you don't start off saying, well, I'm going to do this and this and this and this. You kind of just slowly migrate into these things. And next thing you know, you're juggling all these plates, but at the same time, you've found a way to work it into your life that you can do these things. And
I think amazing. A lot of it also is high quantities of caffeine and a lack of sleep.
Oh, yes.
And so I don't mind saying that I am Keurig propelled. And so I do a lot of coffee and I don't sleep as much as I should.
Oh,
but
man.
but also I love what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, with the artists on the TV and the radio and some of the artists I even do, in magazine, they need an outlet, and I enjoy giving it to them,
mm-hmm.
and I enjoy sharing with viewers and listeners and readers what I'm enjoying,
mm-hmm.
and I hope that's what I hope comes across, because it's a passion,
mm-hmm.
and those things may not feed my family or pay my mortgage,
mm-hmm.
but they certainly feed my heart and soul.
Yeah.
And I think, Mike, all of us have to do a certain amount of that. We got to pay the bills. We got to put gas in the car. We got to have enough money for groceries. But you got to feed the creative muse too, because otherwise something inside you just dies. And I think most musicians, we're all little kids at heart.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody always jokes with me. It's like, oh, a new guitar came in the TV station. Look at Eric, how happy he is. It's like, yeah, you're an older big kid, but you're still a kid. It's like, oh, look. A new close guitar came in. I get to review.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. That's
so I think it's finding those victories, man.
Yeah, and that's such a great way to end at least today's chapter. That is a message that I think I personally needed to hear. So thank you. and creatives
well, we're all
alike.
living it, right?
Yeah, all the creatives. Hopefully, anybody who out there is listening. Please look up Eric's book and look up him online. He's got episodes on YouTube. And just follow Eric on Instagram. He's a very busy man, and the busyness is inspiring. I think it is great. So,
well, and if anybody has questions on any of the gear or anything
mm-hmm.
that I get in, or if you have a Lucille and you have questions, as a lady recently reached out to me a few weeks ago that mm-hmm. her dad was the bus driver for B.B. King, and I'm helping her out. So if I'm happy to help anybody, if you got questions and need information on Lucille's or whatever, I'll do my best.
Awesome. Hang on the line here, Eric, real quick. Guys out there, people, thank you for checking out this podcast. Again, thanks to Eric, my guest, just a wealth of information and entertainment and knowledge. And hopefully you guys can check out the link on the podcast here to check out his book. And I will also provide links to all of your, to the shows, anything that you have out there, check it out in the blog. So thanks for checking out the podcast, people. Don't forget to check out the songwritersplanner.com, and we'll see you on the next episode. Peace and love.